Good and Ruly.
Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new season of the Globe Pure podcast, and I'm your host, Rocyie Wong, still the same host. I'm very excited to have this special guest with us. Her name is Ruth. Say hi, Ruth.
Hello.
Hi. So how I found Ruth was very similar. I found her on social media and she was doing a collab reel with one of my friends. So I decided to just slide into DM because I found her content very relatable and very practical. Ruth is actually a mental health therapist. So hi Ruth.
Hello. Thanks for having me here.
I'm very excited to have this chat actually. So Ruth, for those who are not that familiar about you, why don't you introduce a little bit more about yourself?
Right. My name is Ruth. I'm a registered and licensed counselor with the Malaysian board, and I am also a clinical trauma specialist.
Wow, clinical trauma specialist. So why I'm having Ruth on the show for a brand new season of season 2, really I'm very honored to have her on the show as well, is because I really wanted to have more impactful conversation on mental health related to skin condition. And we all know that having skin condition, we struggle with mental health every single day, every waking moment of our lives actually. But I believe there are more impactful conversations to have on this topic, and that's why we are having this conversation. And we have actually arranged a few episodes of mental health focused topic, and we are also going to be talking a lot about cognitive behavior therapy. So honestly, if you ask me what is cognitive behavior therapy, I have no idea. So Ruth, actually, what is cognitive behavior therapy?
So cognitive behavior therapy is essentially the gold standard therapy that is recommended to use for disorders such as like anxiety, depression, which is also very common disorders nowadays anyway. So essentially the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy is that how we think dictates how we feel about something, which then leads to how I action on something. So if I think that I am not doing well, for example, then obviously I would feel maybe a bit sad, not very happy, and I would action it by maybe crying or just staying at home, locking myself up in the room, and then the cycle kind of continues this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So stress and anxiety and depression,
Yes.
all these, do we call it condition? Or
I think it's a spectrum, right? I mean, for all feelings, all feelings are natural, they are functional, but I think it becomes a disorder when it's not functional. So when my anxiety is so overwhelming that I can't even leave the house. But anxiety by itself should be quite functional. It helps me remember, okay, what time do I have a meeting? What time do I need to get ready for something? So it's not all bad. Yes.
did you watch the movie Inside Out?
I haven't yet. Unfortunately, I need to find time for it.
I think you should totally watch it. But it's very interesting what Ruth has mentioned about anxiety and depression, because these two terms, including stress, are one of the very common terms that we hear in the skin condition advocacy sphere, right?
Right.
We hear about this all the time,
Yeah.
but honestly, I hear about it for many years, and I have struggled with it for many years. And unfortunately, for the past few years, I did not have the financial capacity to kind of have a therapist to have a very intimate conversation. And that's why I'm very excited to break all these big topics down with you. Anxiety, depression, and stress, these are the common symptoms of, living with a skin condition. So yeah, let's dive right. So Ruth, for this episode, this is our first episode of the mental health series, right? I'm just going to be setting the ground rule here. I'm just going to be very vulnerable with you.
Sure.
And, okay, deep breath. Okay, let me just be very honest. Most of the time, growing up, especially having this skin condition since high school, I've always felt that I don't have a very nice body. So, yeah, thank you. So what happens is when I look into the mirror, I don't like what I see. And until today, actually, I feel more comfortable to shower like in darker space. I don't really want to turn on the light.
Right.
And sometimes the lighting makes my skin a bit redder than usual as well.
Okay.
And also, right now my skin is still flaky. So whenever I go everywhere, my skin will be everywhere.
Okay.
So whenever I see my skin, it's like I'm reminded of my shame and I feel very embarrassed. And sometimes when the feeling gets a bit intense, I can feel a bit disgusted by myself, which I'm sure many of you who are listening to this, it's quite a common feelings. And because of this, like when I was younger, I don't do it anymore now, but when I was younger, and also apply to a lot of people, I used to withdraw from a lot of social gatherings.
Right.
Like friends asked me to go to the beach. I would say no. Like I remember when I was 18, my friends organized a beach trip. It was like a after SPM kind of thing. And they all went. I decided to not go because I don't know how to explain to them about my skin because they were not aware that I had a skin condition back then. And until today, when I look back, honestly, I wish I was more upfront with them about my skin condition.
Yeah.
So looking back, I felt like I miss out on something. Most of the time when I was younger, I would cover up because I am generally not very happy about how I look like.
Okay.
And when I look at other girls and they are able to wear whatever they want, I just feel very sad, like I can't do that.
Yeah.
Took me a while to get out of my shell,
Sure.
but honestly, on bad days, I still want to cover up
Right. Okay.
just to feel more comfortable. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think it's okay to cover up. I think everybody has good days and bad days, especially with the skin condition. Of course, when it flares, sometimes we can see covering up as bad, so to speak, negative, right?
Yeah.
Because, I'm ashamed. But sometimes we can also see it as a self-protective mechanism because maybe I'm actually protecting my skin from getting more inflamed, actually. So, I mean, I think it's basically how you view the covering up. After all, covering up is just an action. But what is the intention behind the action is what really matters to you personally.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a very good point. Sometimes I feel like, I want to cover up today. It means that, I'm not brave enough.
Okay.
So that's not necessarily true, right?
Yes, because the fact that you think you are not brave enough makes you feel like you're not brave enough, makes you feel a bit scared, which then makes you feel like, I need to cover up more, even on days where actually maybe the flare-up isn't that bad, so to speak.
I see. So going back to how I feel about my body.
Yes.
I learned about this term a few years ago from social
Yes.
media. It's called body dysmorphia.
Okay.
And I didn't how would I put it? Like, I don't think I have body dysmorphia, but I can totally understand when people say, hey, I have body dysmorphia.
Right.
Because I have those moments too.
Sure.
But perhaps it's not all the time.
Yeah.
Because when my skin is a bit less inflamed, I feel better about myself. But when my skin is really inflamed
Then-
and it's really flaky,
Yeah.
that's when it hit me.
Sure,
Right?
sure.
So, can you share a little bit about what you think about what body dysmorphia is?
Right. Body dysmorphia is essentially a disorder of how you kind of view your body. So I'm going to just use the example of maybe anorexia, right? People with anorexia, it's like even though I'm skinny already, but how I perceive my body as is still fat, if I can use that word. And that's why they continuously starve themselves, they control and limit. So to a certain extent, it makes sense why people who struggle with skin conditions would have to a certain a spectrum, right, of a body dysmorphia, would struggle a bit with it because if it's inflamed, then I am already not very happy with how it looks.
Yeah.
Right? And therefore I feel a lot more shame, a lot more embarrassment about it. Even when it feels alright or when it's not inflamed, I still perceive it as that can bother having almost body dysmorphia. But usually body dysmorphia is more for like weight,
See.
size, that kind of thing. But I'm sure it can apply to skin conditions as well to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's funny how Ruth mentioned that, like, to ourselves, maybe our skin looks very red and very flaky, but actually in a lot of situations, many times it happened before that I told my friend that, hey, yo, my skin is flaring up today, but they told me that they actually don't notice anything. So that is actually one kind of reminder for me and for those who are listening to this as well, to kind of maybe also maybe it's worth it to learn how to look beyond the skin sometimes in moments where we can.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
So actually, Ruth, when I find myself being overwhelmed with all these negative thoughts about
Sure.
my body, where, during the bad days where I really couldn't get out of it, right? And I would rather just choose to stay home and not go out and not live life.
Right.
Just find myself being very overwhelmed with
Yeah.
this. Actually, what can I do?
I think very simplistically, following the cognitive behavioral model that we talked about just now, is essentially what you're saying is, I think that my skin is really bad today, it's flaring out. And it could be true, right? But what it has led you to feel is that I feel sad, scared, or embarrassed, so therefore it leads to the action of withdrawing from society. I don't really want to go out. But what we can do about it is actually to interrupt either the behavior side of it or the thought side of it. So behavior side of it is what we would call opposite action. I don't want to go out, don't want to be in society. But in actuality, if we think about it, sometimes that's exactly what we need. We need to be out. Having connections with friends, gets my mind off how bad my skin is, and actually, enjoying the moment, or even feeling that sense of belonging or acceptance, being around friends is actually really what we need. So that's interrupting the cycle on the behavior aspect. But I think going back to the thought aspect, which is actually more important, is that you think it looks terrible, but is there a way to reframe it? Is it really as terrible as I think it is? Is it that bad? Could I still go out but covered up if that makes me a bit more comfortable? Or can I focus on something else, like the functionality of me today? Actually, my energy levels feel pretty alright, like I don't feel lethargic or anything. Why wouldn't I want to do something productive with my energy levels? Why just focus on the skin aspect of things?
Actually, one thing that Ruth mentioned, I find it very helpful. It's like aha moment for me is that actually I did have many, many bad days, but I still chose to go out. I cover up, and then I went out, and then I met with my friends, or I just went somewhere where I would just observe people, right? And honestly, I mostly always felt very inspired and recharged, and it reminded me that life is way beyond my skin, and that there are so many more other things that I can contribute that gives me back value as a person, that reminded me as a person I have much more to give actually. Yeah, so thank you for that reminder. But back to the way that, how I think, which you mentioned is actually more important.
Yes.
Then the next question I have for you,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to be very honest. So then, how can I change how I think about myself? Because I think there are so many people struggling with this. Like, we find it very hard to change the way we think about ourselves,
Right.
which impact our action
Yes.
that we choose to.
I think the main way of how we can truly change how we think is to first build self-awareness. I think what we think about is so automatic every day. Every day I have the same thoughts about my skin being inflamed, or I look ugly, or I don't feel like I look good. This is almost like all these automatic thoughts are a normal running track narrative in my head. So basically, we need to create awareness that we're even thinking these negative things in the first place, right? Because I can't change something that I don't know is a problem,
Yeah.
right? And from there, so I think journaling is a good way to do it, because then at least I can see my thoughts being put out visually, right? And when the thoughts are put out visually, I mean, we are so used to thinking about thoughts, very bad thoughts about ourselves, very negative thoughts, and it's just doesn't shock us. But when there's value in putting it visually, and asking yourself, really, is this what I want to think about myself for the rest of my life?
No.
Yeah, exactly. No, right? And therefore, when I put it out visually in a journal, for example, then that is where I can develop awareness, and that's where I can also interrupt the thoughts and ask myself, like, is this really true? Because like you said just now, when you actually cover up and you go out anyways, and you said people watching just now, and you said like, oh, people maybe don't even notice that your flare is that bad, or they don't notice it actually, I don't know, right? That in itself is evidence that your skin isn't really as bad as you think it is that day itself.
So it sounds a bit like we need to find evidence.
Correct. So that's why journaling and having a thought record sheet, which is what therapists would use in their sessions, is important, because we are recording down not just your thoughts, but then also what's the evidence for this thought? What's the evidence for and against this thought that you currently have?
Okay, let's do an example right
Sure.
now.
Yes. Give me an example. Give me a situation.
So I'm just gonna share this example. Like previously, I wanted to go on online dating apps, and I was so anxious. I was literally like, I think I was crying actually. Like I didn't want to put myself out there.
Okay.
So I think that people would reject me because my skin looks disgusting.
Okay.
So that's what I think.
Yes.
So how do we go about it?
Okay.
With the thought record sheet.
Yes, okay. So you think that people will reject you. So what I would suggest is actually putting yourself out there first, actually creating that profile,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's the only way we can even collect evidence. And if you get, I don't know how apps work actually. I guess they swipe you, right? They swipe right or something.
We swipe each other.
Okay. So if they swipe, then you get a lot of swipe rights, I guess.
Yeah.
Then that is actually evidence that maybe they don't even notice your skin, or maybe you are not as unattractive as you think you are.
Okay. So what happened was, so like I mentioned, I was
Yeah.
very anxious
Yes.
and I was very scared.
Yes.
So I got my best friends to support me, and they were very encouraging. It's like, Rocyie, just put yourself out there. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So with their support, I managed to put myself out there. Like my profile was born. And then through the action of swiping, right, of course I got a few matches. And I did get like some response where they found out about my skin, and they were very polite, that they expressed that it wasn't for them. But there are also other people who continue the conversation actually. So yeah, it makes sense that right now you're telling me like, okay, I assume that people will reject me because of my skin. But the fact is, according to what happened, it is not necessarily true.
Yes.
And I think what was helpful for me is I reminded myself that even normal people who don't have skin condition, they all get rejection too. And that has kind of like taught me to not take rejection so personally.
Correct. Exactly that. Just because you get some rejections, you also got some matches.
Yeah.
And we always kind of can fall into the trap of magnifying the negative and minimizing the positive, but life comes with good and bad.
Yeah.
Just because you get rejections don't mean that it's definitely due to your skin condition. I mean, every other Tom, Dick and Harry out there could also be experiencing rejection for other reasons.
It seems like the thought record sheet journal, do we call it that?
Sure, you can call it that.
It seems like it's a very useful tool for us to kind of rewire our thinking.
Yeah,
Is that right?
exactly right.
So could you share a little bit like the mechanism of it?
Okay. So a thought record sheet usually starts with what's the situation. So in your case, the situation was wanting to start a dating profile, right? The feeling behind this situation is a lot of anxiety,
Yes.
correct? Okay. And the thought behind this is that I will be rejected, hence
Yeah.
the feeling of anxiousness, right? So situation, feeling, and thought. Okay? Yeah. So then think about the next two sections as the evidence for and against that I mentioned just now. Right? So actually, the question should be, how am I going to gain this evidence for or against? Because if I'm just like anxious and not doing anything, I will stay in the anxiousness, right? That's why I said, okay, the best way to go about it is to just make the profile anyway and see how it goes, right? So then from there, I can find evidence for this thought or evidence against the thought. And in your case, you found evidence against it. Your skin isn't the major deterrent that you think it is.
Yeah,
And therefore,
actually, yes.
you get a more balanced thought in the sense that actually anyone out there with or without a skin condition can experience rejection, can experience good relationships. It's a mixed bag of life anyways, and therefore the anxiety should decrease, and I just feel a bit more neutral or motivated to let's go date.
I like the word that Ruth mentioned actually. It's called neutral. Because a lot of the times, I actually felt negative about myself. And neutral actually allowed me to make decision more rationally instead of being overwhelmed and overly affected by my emotions.
Yes.
And that's actually very, very useful.
Yes, because neutral is where we want to be. That's kind of not to say that emotions are bad, but I think sometimes we cannot let emotions dictate our actions because it can come from a very fired up emotional place, but we want to really be able to process and think things through to reach a point where I'm neutral about it and I'm balanced about it. And I can take the appropriate next steps that's good for myself in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what Ruth has reminded me, and then of course this whole conversation has reminded me, is that I think very often for people who have skin condition, just like you and me, we perceive the world as a very scary place where wherever we go, we would face rejection and people would judge us. But actually, what I have experienced personally is that when we allow ourselves to kind of experiment, like putting ourselves out there to kind of just live life, actually I find that the world is kinder than we perceive it to be. For sure, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. There are still people who stare at us and, you know, like just pass a lot of negative comments and ridiculous response. But there's also so many other people who are kind and encouraging and just inclusive, right? They try to include us in a lot of things, despite how we look like, despite our skin condition, and I think that is a beautiful thing. And yes, it takes a little bit of courage to experience that, but I promise you, it's always worth it as long as, you know, you put yourself out there just to live life. I think life would always surprise you. So thank you, Ruth, for, you know, this little very practical tool and little reminder as well. So for this episode, we have discussed about body dysmorphia, how we feel about ourselves, and the theory of think, feel, and action. We have also given you this tool that is called Thought Record Sheet. In the next episode, we are going to talk a little bit about how do we feel a bit more confident in our own skin. So yes, see you in the next one, okay? Thank you so much, Ruth, and we will meet you in the next one. Bye!
Bye.